Hi, I'm Julia Cohen, Managing Director and co-founder of Plastic Pollution Coalition. I'm excited today to be talking with Dr. Manasa Mantravadi, a Plastic Pollution Coalition scientific advisor. She is a pediatrician and founder of Ahimsa, a company providing colorful stainless steel mealware for kids. Dr. Mantravadi, it's so nice to meet you. Thank you for joining Plastic Talks.
It is fabulous to be here. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, let's just jump right in. I've got so many questions for you. My first is, of course, what inspired you to create your company, Ahimsa, and what exactly does Ahimsa mean?
Sure. So I went to training to become a pediatrician because that is my passion in life and my professional career. And so, I've been practicing clinical medicine for many years. And when I heard from the American Academy of Pediatrics, their official policy statement in 2018, talking about plastics being harmful to children's health, and that chemicals in plastic can interfere with their normal kind of growth and development, and we really shouldn't be using it, but rather using glass and stainless steel, I realized, wait a minute, we've got this really big groundbreaking policy statement talking about plastic's effect on children's health and making these great recommendations to use glass or stainless steel. But then parents go down the aisles of these big box stores and everything that you see in the baby industry and the children's industry related to food is plastic. And so it was very hard for me to see kind of our medical community saying and recommending one thing, but then not having solutions for the masses of parents to follow the recommendations of those pediatricians. And so there was a big disconnect between science and industry. And so I decided that I would really try to fill the gap by providing safe, sustainable products for families to use at the dinner table. And so I launched the company Ahimsa, which is a line of colorful stainless steel dinnerware for kids to help parents really follow the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, latest recommendation to use glass or stainless steel. And I chose the word Ahimsa because Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word meaning avoiding harm. And so, in terms of producing products that are avoiding harm for children's health, avoiding harm for the planet. And as a pediatrician, it was the first oath I took as a doctor. And certainly as a mom, it was the first oath I took when I had my first children.
Wow. That is wonderful, and it sounds so powerful. It leads perfectly into kind of my next question of what are the main concerns with children being exposed to the chemicals in plastic in their food or water, and do the same dangers exist for adults?
Yes. So the interesting thing about plastics is that the chemicals used to make plastic, make them more durable, make them pliable, make them bendable, all of those things, those chemicals in plastic look like our hormones. So what we call them is endocrine disrupting chemicals. Endocrine is simply another word for hormones. And the way our hormone system works in our body is critical for both adults and kids. A lot of people think about hormones in adults, things like fertility, obesity, but that is very important, but it is also important in kids. Most people don't think about hormones in children, but that same hormonal system, your thyroid, your pituitary, your pancreas, all of these organs in our body that are part of this hormone system help children grow and develop. And that process is happening very early in life. And so when you have normal growth and development, you have this hormone system that really is developed in those first few years of life and beyond. That helps a child's brain develop properly, their kind of normal puberty, which then leads to normal fertility, everything from normal regulation of how your body processes fat and sugar. And so that is all meant to kind of regulate itself in a certain way. the chemicals in plastic look like our hormones, which is crazy. So it basically goes in and wreaks havoc on our hormone system. And so what we see in children, kind of in big, what we call population studies, like big populations, we see children now have huge amounts of learning disabilities, things like ADHD. We see obesity and type 2 diabetes, something that didn't even exist in children, more than 20 years ago. Something called precocious puberty or premature puberty. We see children undergoing puberty at earlier and earlier ages that we've never seen before. These things have all happened in a short period of time. And we know genetics does not change that quickly. In one generation, you don't have these kind of big changes in chronic health conditions. And so it is part, of course, diet and exercise contribute, but we cannot ignore environmental toxins, which quite frankly is very, very intricately tied to our food system and our kind of commerce system with packaging. And so that's really what happens. Children being exposed to plastic in whether it's food or water, or remember, like the overwhelming majority of products for children, like their toys, are also plastic. And so they're kind of living in this plastic world during crucial phases of growth and development at which, these chemicals in plastic are wreaking havoc. So I hope that all makes sense. And it's really, hormones drive normal growth and development. Chemicals in plastic look like these hormones and really change around that growth and development in children. And like I said, sadly, the overwhelming majority of things for children are made of plastic.
Yeah. Wow. And so, and how significant is the difference between children's exposure versus adults, and what are the dangers for adults versus children?
Yes, so the same dangers exist for adults. So I don't want this to feel like it's just a childhood problem. We see major things like infertility, decrease in sperm count, obesity, all of these same things in adults as well. The thing with children, especially when it comes to plastics in their food and water, is that we're just bigger. Like we adults are bigger. So for per pound of body weight and kind of like surface area, they are consuming more because their surface area, their weight is less than us. And so, and they are exposed to this at those crucial times of growth and development. And so it's really those two things. And I guess number three is that they're more consistently exposed to it, because I just talked about how, all their dinnerware is plastic. Maybe ours is glass. Their toys are plastic. We're, using other things rather than plastic toys. So it's those three things that make it even a bigger issue, that they are more consistently exposed, that when they are exposed, it has a bigger impact based on their size. And it's happening at a time that's very crucial to their normal growth and development.
Got it. Well, and so you use stainless steel in your products. Is that the best material to use for serving food and water? Are there other materials that are safe? What about ceramics or glass?
Sure. So there are only two. So in that 2018 American Academy of Pediatrics policy statement, they basically said, hey, listen, try to avoid plastic to serve and store food if at all possible. And we really recommend using glass or stainless steel instead. And I actually asked the main author, Dr. Trisande, who is a wonderful pediatrician in New York, who has devoted his life work to pediatric environmental health. I asked him this question: why did you choose these two materials? And the answer was, well, we have been able to study it for the longest period of time and have assessed the safety profile and feel very confident with that. And so some of these newer materials that are out, we just don't know as much in the long-term kind of safety profile, both for human health and for the environment. And so that's why I chose stainless steel. I also chose stainless steel in our products because I grew up on stainless steel. It is the material of choice when it comes to dinnerware in India. So being an Indian immigrant. And, if you have Indian friends, they'll tell you, yeah, we had steel at the dining table. And so many people across the world are using this because it really is a safer material. The reason it's such a great safety profile, and the reason you see stainless steel in kind of the medical world, like you'll see it in the operating rooms, you'll see it in the even in indwelling implants, it's something called inert. Inert means it doesn't interact with its surroundings. And so if it's inside your body, it doesn't interact. If you put food on it, it doesn't interact. And so it's called inert. Glass is the same way. And it's what we call non-porous. So little bacteria can't hide in kind of these small little pores like plastic or some of the other materials, like silicone and stuff have. So in terms of just being antimicrobial, inert and not interacting, it was just a better choice in my line of work for producing foodware for kids. But you can also see that we use it in other settings like the hospital or a commercial cafeteria. So it really kind of makes sense for what we do.
Great. That's super helpful. I have a now 11-year-old daughter. I think you may know that. And definitely went with the steel divider trays in our own home, even when she was a child, and the metal refillable water bottles for school when she started going, and all those kinds of things. And they also were extremely durable, right? So
I say AAP recommended glass or stainless steel. Both are really great options. However, if you are a parent of a child of any age, they like to test gravity, and gravity always wins. They haven't figured that part out yet. And so in terms of glass, in terms of just practical, usability, it is a little bit less practical for young kids, especially. But it is it's a great material.
Yeah. Could not agree more. I think I even had one of those glass bottles in the silicone sleeve, and that definitely met its end much more quickly than any of the still going dented metal stainless steel options we have.
And I wanted to add really quick, because you had asked about ceramics. I think that one thing that I've now have seen on the terms of being on this side of this entire process of bringing products to life, manufacturing them, doing testing to make sure they're safe. The one thing I will say is whatever material it is, so especially things like ceramics can have lead in them, depending on the manufacturer, and things like bamboo that you feel like maybe it is more natural, often have melamine binders in it. So just be cautious about where your products are coming from. Try to read labels and demand that brands do better, because that's what we're trying to do. But the goal is we want all brands to do better, to produce safer materials for, things that are coming into our home.
Totally. Well, and what's a melamine binder?
So melamine is just like another one of these chemicals that we see, especially in plastic products. And so in order for bamboo, this is one of the things I spoke about with why they chose these two materials instead of some of the other ones. It is in order for that bamboo to kind of stick together, melamine binders are kind of used to make that material stick together. So again, are all ceramics and all bamboo horrible? No, certainly, and so I think it's important for people to understand that this is a highly unregulated, unfortunately, industry, which is what we're really trying to change. And that even for the brands who want to do better, it gets very confusing on how to test your products and how to keep it safe. And I myself went through this, and I'm a scientist, and it was hard for me, so just it should not be on the consumer to have to figure out all of this, which is why we need better oversight and regulation. So the consumer is not tasked with all of this, because that's just really not fair.
Right. That sounds like a lot to learn. And even for scientists, still a lot to check on and keep track of. Well, and so these things come from somewhere, right? So it's not just what the kids eat or drink when it comes to plastic. Could you tell us about how plastic production affects the health of children who live in the communities near those petrochemical plants where plastic is produced?
Yes, I think that is probably one of the most important things, that really at every age and stage of plastic production is kind of like is bad. And so I think that's what people don't realize. They think, oh, it's just kind of this life cycle at the end of plastic. Oh, it's not recyclable. But really from the time it's produced, and so you kind of talked about petrochemical. So in order to produce plastic, it takes kind of oil and the petroleum. And so even in that, you're creating a really big carbon footprint. In terms of usage, we talked about that. And then even in terms of the disposal, I think you guys probably have screamed this from the rooftop as well, but less than 8% of plastic worldwide is actually recycled. And so at each stage of production, and ultimately it's not being recycled, each of those has its own byproducts, whether it's an effect on the environment or an effect on health. And so it's really important for people to understand that, because it's not just about, oh, these are floating around in the ocean. It is a full scale plastic crisis, and climate change are very intricately tied in together. And both are really global threats of human health.
Sad, but true. Yes. And I think some of the latest research shows that something like less than 5% of plastic is recycled.
Sarcastic, excellent that it is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well, and of what is, quote unquote, recycled, what is incinerated and becomes air pollution, or what is shipped to other countries with less stringent regulations, what is actually, quote unquote, recycled into, the same product, or mostly it's downcycled.
Correct. And so we, are fortunate in kind of a more developed country. And not to say that we don't have these same issues here, but certainly in terms of the World Health Organization, and even at the AAP, American Academy of Pediatrics, we have a council it's called the Council on Environmental Health and Climate Change, because we know it's so intricately tied in. Air kind of pollution, water pollution, and toxicity there, all of these are really related. And so we can't think about them in a silo of, oh, it affects the planet, or oh, it affects health. It really is all encompassing. And I always say this so people can hear, but people and the planet are connected, and the lasting impact between the two will not be felt by us, but rather our children. So it's really important to understand that this is really all related. And the people who are going to really feel the exposure to this are our children. And it's our job to fix it as adults, quite frankly.
Completely agree. Especially for children who are living next to, or in the shadow of toxic petrochemical plants where they're, poisoning the air and the water and the soil. Precisely.
Everyone has to have air to breathe and water to stay hydrated to live. And for those to be laced with kind of toxic byproducts of a lot of this processing is really just, it should not be happening at baseline. Those are basic human rights.
Yeah. Well, sadly, another toxic material, that people have been aware of for a long time and heard a lot about, and is somewhat back in the news, is lead. And it's estimated that in the US alone, there are 22 million people who depend on lead service lines for their water. And from your experience as a pediatrician, specifically, can you briefly describe the impact that lead can have on children?
Yes. So exposure to lead, it really can cause harm on children's health, but specifically on their cognitive development. So really kind of their brain and nervous system. And so we see things like slowed growth and development, learning and behavior problems, hearing and speech problems. And it can actually cause lower IQ, decreased ability to pay attention, and underperformance in school. I think one of the most, if you want to really look at, okay, what happened before and after. So for example, when we found out lead was bad for children, we tried to remove it from the paints and the gasoline. And while we still have a long way to go, what we see now is a generation of children who are 4 to 8 IQ points higher than the generation before them. Like, that's a pretty significant jump when you make an intervention, which actually shows the true harm of what lead is doing on IQ and cognitive development. And so that has become a part of what we do as pediatricians is lead screening. So if you have young children and you're going to your pediatricians, you'll often get a questionnaire to assess your lead risk, and potentially even have blood work, because we know that the health effects of these exposures are more harmful to children, especially less than 6 years of age, because their bodies are still developing and growing rapidly. And again, just like plastic, right? They also tend to explore the world with their hands and are crawling. And so they may be in areas that are contaminated with, lead dust and lead products, and they're putting it into their mouth. And so it's incredibly important that we are addressing this at every age and stage, just like plastic.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I think it's been known for a while, and there's been lots of research and lots of work done to try and improve things. And that's the statistic about 4 to 8 IQ points above previous, lead impacted generations that's really powerful. I'm not sure I'd quite heard that, or it didn't sink in. That makes me just even more, concerned about, as we undergo lead pipe replacement across the United States, many communities are considering or are already starting to distribute plastic bottled water to provide quote unquote safe drinking water while the pipe replacement takes place. And so, as this starts rolling out, there's billions of dollars in, some of the most recently passed legislation of our tax dollars to do this. What are steps that families can take to decrease their exposure to lead and plastic chemicals in their drinking water during this important time?
Sure. I think this is one thing that I talk about a lot, is sometimes it feels like all hope is lost, right? You're like, okay, the lead is in our pipes now, and the plastic is everywhere. What do we even do with this? It's everywhere. Is there even anything we can do? So I want people to feel that, yes, these are big problems, and yes, it is kind of everywhere, but I think just take a deep breath and say, okay, what can I do in my own home that could be helpful? Because that may look different for every person. And so when we think about just plastic water bottles versus drinking water, I think one of the easiest things that you can do is talk to your pediatrician. And I always recommend even just getting an environmental toxin kind of audit of your home. And most public health departments in your communities will be able to do this. So they'll be able to assess kind of for your lead risks and other kind of environmental toxins. It's again, you can talk to your pediatrician about it. You can kind of assess for it yourself by just calling your public health department. And so that's just one way to at least identify some of the risks. In terms of kind of steps to decrease your exposure to lead. So you talked about water. I think one easy way is potentially really using a filter, whether that is, a reverse osmosis system, or at least kind of just a common water filter that can help, because you have to then balance it between plastic bottles, which are also, as I mentioned before, chemicals and plastic leaching into your food and drink. And so again, I want to take this all with a grain of salt, because at the end of the day, hydration is the most important thing to keep ourselves safe, especially for children. And so, again, I don't want people to hear this and feel very paralyzed by the amount of negative information that we're discussing, but rather feel, okay, there's some choices I can make. And then in terms of just overall kind of steps to kind of protect your family and keep your home lead safe. Again, you can kind of test your home for lead with the Department of Health. If you're living in an older home, particularly before the 1970s, making sure that you're getting tested, and then keeping the children away from those old windows, old porches, areas where there's like chipping or peeling of paint. And don't just making sure, like something as simple as cleaning your room, your home regularly, wiping down floors and other levels of surfaces can really decrease the amount of toxins in your home. And even taking shoes off at the door can help reduce tracking in some of that dirt will carry in some of the exposures like lead. And so I think just knowing that there's a few things you can do, hopefully is empowering to people. And I always like to advocate and say, call your local legislators, email and bombard them. When they keep hearing from us, they eventually will have to listen to us, and just know that, there are people like the Plastic Pollution Coalition, like Ahimsa and others doing really, really strong work to change the regulations. It's not going to happen overnight, but we're trying.
Right. Couldn't agree more. There's a election happening, I think, in less than 3 weeks in most parts of this country. Most communities have some version. So voting, kind of key to all of that as well. And you talked about, the big picture can be overwhelming. And I know just one very key part of that is especially for new mothers, and that, with this new research showing that microplastics have been found in breast milk, in addition to placentas, right, it is so hard to avoid. What should expectant mothers do to give their babies the best chance at being healthy? And what other advice would you have for parents and families who want to protect their children's health from plastic pollution and the toxic chemicals in plastic?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just be conscious of the things that you're using on a daily basis. So, for example, plastic is everywhere, right? So it's everywhere. You can't get rid of it everywhere, but kind of pick and choose what feels best to you. So for me, I chose my kitchen, right? I chose my kitchen because my food and drink is kind of something that's going into my body. So I thought, okay, for me, I'm going to start there because I felt like it was the biggest bang for my buck, right? And so saying, I'm going to really try to avoid any degree of plastic where possible. And so something like, for example, switching out any of the old plastic containers for something like glass or stainless steel. Again, dishes that are, not lined with plastic. Even something like taking a Teflon pan, those nonsticks, those have chemicals like PFAS and other kind of endocrine disrupting chemicals. Switching those out for cast iron and stainless steel. Those are kind of places where I started. You can also think about other areas of your home, for example, the shower, right? So I've switched over from plastic shampoo bottles to bar soaps, using kind of more reusable detergents that aren't coming in plastic bottles or plastic lined. So it's just maybe picking one thing and slowly integrating that. And over time, you'll start to kind of incorporate it more and more, but you just have to start small. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Because at the end of the day, because microplastics are found in breast milk, should you stop breastfeeding your baby? I would say, no, you should not. You should breastfeed your baby because that is something that we know is healthy for the baby in terms of nutrition and immune protection. So we really are faced with essentially kind of constant choices and risk mitigation and what is better. And so I would say, things like hydrating and nutritional intake and immune protection really outdoes the degree of kind of effects of these plastic chemicals. And so that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, choose what's right for you, but just kind of be knowledgeable and empowered in your decision making, and then just know that you can start small and keep going. Because if you try to do all of it at once, it can be, very overwhelming. And so just start small.
Totally. Well, thank you so much. I know, is there anything else that you would want our audience to know? Plastic Pollution Coalition has resources like healthy living guides, healthy pregnancy guide, healthy baby guides on our website. So I direct people there, and that kind of reiterates a lot of what you've just said and recommended. But maybe any parting words or knowledge? I'm so grateful for you and for Ahimsa, for your company and what you're doing. Maybe a little bit more about where things are headed there.
Yeah, I think the parting words is kind of what you had alluded to before. We can't change everything. So at an individual level, change what you can, what's best for you, and make kind of these small baby steps. And then in terms of what we can do together, kind of as a community, of whether that's in your city, your town, your state, your country, in these coalitions, is if we each make these small changes, it makes a really big impact. And I want people to understand that it's not about changing every degree of legislation and having alternative energy and like creating a whole new, it's the simple, small, little things that matter. And if we all do it, it can make a really big impact. So that is what we are here to do with Ahimsa, is to educate people and empower them that those really small changes that they can make a big impact, and then empower other brands to do better, right? To have this sense of social responsibility to these children, to the family, to the one and only planet we have, and for the consumers to keep them on their toes, right? Like you vote with your vote, you also vote with your wallet, So supporting brands that are really trying to do better will eventually change the market. And the hope is that I always say, I hope I have a ton of competition with Ahimsa, because then that means I'm doing something right and we're producing better, safer products that are better for the kids and better for the planet.
Wonderful. Well, on that note, I cannot thank you enough for spending this time with us. Really appreciate you and all you are doing. And in particular, Ahimsa, and love your beautiful trays and products, and hope everyone checks them out. And we should be having them in all of our schools instead of any kind of styrofoam or plastic, in my opinion, of course. So thank you so much for joining us, Manasa, and we look forward to being in touch and hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Plastic Talks. If you enjoyed this interview, please like and subscribe. This program was made possible by the generous donations from our supporters worldwide. If you would like to hear more interviews with experts and activists and would like to support our work, please visit plasticpollutioncoalition.org.